So let's move on to our last presentation of the day, to our last paper, which will be presented by Raphael Cohen, who is a postdoctoral researcher and a visiting professor at Vrije Universiteit Brussels. His research focuses on many areas. Amongst them are the history of political ideas, international relations, and international law, but also cultural and social history of migrations. He has published two books and several articles and chapters in edited volumes, and one of the books deals with Friedrich Gentz, who is also the topic of his talk today. As you can already see, the topic of his talk is Friedrich Gentz at the Congress of Laibach. So, Raphael, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your introductions. And I would like also to thank the organizer for the invitation to speak to this conference. And I also want to thank Professor Katja Grubesch, with whom I'm also cooperating within the Utopia European Alliances, which is an alliance between several European universities, including the University of Ljubljana and the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. So I will talk about Friedrich Gentz and the Congress of Ljubljana. So on 27 March 1821, Friedrich Gentz wrote to Joseph Pilat, "Ljubljana is today the real light spot of Europe. Only here can one have precise information on what is happening in all European countries." Indeed, both to Friedrich Gentz and Metternich, the congresses of Opava, Ljubljana, and Verona represented his diplomacy at its zenith, to paraphrase the title of Paul W. Schroeder doctoral thesis. Friedrich Gentz embodied in many ways the Sattelzeit period. Born in Breslau in Silesia to de Wrocław in Poland, from a French Huguenot mother, he studied law and philosophy under Kant in Königsberg to de Kaliningrad in Russia. Employed as a civil servant in the Prussian administration from 1785 to 1802, he became a journalist who participated in the Salon of Henriette Hertz and Raël Lévin in Berlin. With Wilhelm von Humboldt and the Swedish Gustav von Bringmann, they formed an intellectual trio spanning their times, writing and discussing about the French Revolution and its aftermath. Indeed, Gentz translated Edmund Burke and the French Monarchien in German, becoming one of the founding fathers of conservatism in continental Europe. Deeply in debt and at variance with Prussia's policy of neutrality, Gentz moved to Austria in 1802, where he would stay until his death in 1832. During this Austrian period, Gentz had been Metternich's ghostwriter, an expert on public finance and political economy, as well as one of the main actors and founders of the European Concert of Powers. Difficult to categorize, he has alternately been labeled as liberal conservative, the German Burke, the publicist of the Holy Alliance, or even as a romantic. In my monography on this political thinker and secretary of the Congress of Ljubljana and all congresses of the post-Napoleonic era, have classified him as a late Enlightenment publicist, since the conceptual framework of his thoughts and writing was the French, German, and Scottish Enlightenment. And he never abandoned the ideological program of the Enlightenment, even though he was at the same time critical towards it, and he has been also influenced by conservative and traditionalist thinkers. In this paper, I will highlight his role as the Secretary of the Congress of Ljubljana, as well as his theory of the right of harm of military intervention. Furthermore, I will draw on the historical debate on the Holy Alliance versus Congress system. And finally, I will reconstruct his political networks at the time of the Congress. Gentz arrived the 12th of January 1821 in Ljubljana after 5 days of unpleasant travel with his new English carriage from Vienna. He spent, as usual, his travel time reading books. Most of these consisted on contemporary French works. His diary mentioned, for example, the reading of Charles-Louis Le Sure, Histoire des Cosaques, as well as L'Europe après le congrès d'Aix-la-Chapelle from the Prat. During the Congress, he was also reading with passion until 4 o'clock in the morning l'histoire des trois démembrements de la Pologne from Antoine François Claude Ferrand, a member of the French Academy of Science. When he first saw the capital of Carniola, he was pleasantly surprised by the city and went directly to see Metternich, who was staying a few blocks away from him, as we learned from the conference yesterday. In Ljubljana, as in Opava, the negotiation took place without a formal protocol. We just heard about it by Karin, so that the first meeting were conducted in a more informal manner. The negotiator charged Gens to compose a fictitious journal of the proceeding, meaning that, as we have heard also, the first 6 plenary sessions had in reality not all taken place, as officially claimed. Gens wrote to the Prince of Wallachia, Alexander Stutzo, that he was not happy about the fact that the great powers had decided to maintain the same journal system with his signature at the bottom of the reports. In Ljubljana, he was accompanied for the job as secretary by other advisors from the Austrian delegation, such as Nikolaus Wacken, who was already the co-secretary in Vienna, Baron Dupont, or later on Ottenfels. Capodistria from the Russian delegation was also in charge of some reporting duties, as well as other members from other delegations. Additionally, Gens had to draft the war declaration published on 13 February 1821 in the Wiener Zeitung. Gens was also in charge of writing the army bulletin of the Österreichische Beobachter, which he did on several occasions in February, March, and April. As he reported to Pilat, he got many critics both for his declaration of war, which was derided as too sober, as well as for his bulletin, which were inversely called too poetic. Incidentally, Gens had in the same letter declared that, I quote, "Ljubljana is the only place on earth that I like." As during the other congresses, Gens did not spend much time at the accompanying social gatherings. He did attend the fireworks of the anniversary of the emperor on 12 February, or the balls of 25 February and 4 March, as well as some concerts and diners hosted by Metternich. Lastly, this rather secluded secretary attended only one theatrical performance, Rossini, Eduardo e Cristina, on 10th of May. However, he did enjoy walks around the city and the surrounding with Karl Leyden, his personal secretary, a deserter from Napoleon's Grande Armée. Most evening, Gens focused on his work. Diary entries are full of comments on writing articles for the Österreichische Beobachter, the Wiener Zeitung, or various translations and other documents for the Congress itself. He also composed several other works on various political and financial matters during the Congress. At the end of the Congress, Gens finished his work on the final 2 pieces and their translations. These were the Declaration of 12 May signed by Austria, Prussia, and Russia, and the Dépêche circulaire from the same 3 powers. On 13th May, Gens stated in his diary, "Und so den ewig denwürdigen Aufenthalt in Leibach gerade nach 4 Monaten geschlossen." Bois-le-Comte, who was coming with the French delegation, reported in his recollection of the Tropo and Leibach congresses that Gens had written these 2 pieces, and wrote, I quote, "Il y soutient la réputation qui s'était acquise par ses écrits politiques." Let me address now an ongoing historiographical debate. Our panel is entitled "The Diplomacy of the Holy Alliance." And as I mentioned in my introduction, Gens has often been described as the publicist of the Holy Alliance. The 14th August 1824, the Swedish Brinkman reported to him in a letter from Stockholm that the liberals were accusing him of being the real father of the Holy Alliance. Yet, to those who have read the relevant primary sources, now also online, many thanks again to Karin Schneider, the Congress of Ljubljana can hardly be labeled as the Congress of the Holy Alliance. The legal framework used to convene the great powers was the Great Alliance established in 1814-1818, and especially Article 6 of the Quadruple Alliance signed on 20 November 1815, as well as we already heard, the Declaration of the 15th November from Aix-la-Chapelle, and of course the preliminary protocol of 17 November 1820 written by Capodistria. But we could also mention Ghent's review of the result of the Congress of Opava of 7 December 1820, in which he explicitly stated, I quote again, le système concerté entre l'Autriche, la Prusse et la Russie n'est point un système nouveau. Il ne présente qu'une application fidèle des maximes consacrées par les transactions qui ont fondé l'Alliance générale. In fact, all of these documents, as well as all of the documents of the Congress of Ljubljana, were constantly referring to the European Alliance, the Great Alliance, the Allied Power, the General Union, or the transaction of Vienna, Paris, and Aix-la-Chapelle. It is hard to find any reference to the Holy Alliance except the occasional reference to the family or Christian Brotherhood. Of course, we could argue that whenever the main actors of the Congress system are referring to the treaties signed since 1814, they are including the Treaty of the Holy Alliance from September 1815. Yet, Great Britain, which never ratified the Treaty of the Holy Alliance, remained a major member of the Congress system established in 1814-1818. And although the British expressed indeed diverging opinion at Opava, Ljubljana, and Verona, they were still present as a delegation in those congresses. And in any case, in Ghent's correspondence, as well as in his diary during the Congress, he's referring several times to the 5 souverains de la Grande Alliance, or the European system, Alliance or Union, but never to the Holy Alliance. In the historiography, especially in the French one, but not exclusively, the Holy Alliance became the name of the post-Napoleonic era with a very negative and pejorative connotation. In fact, the Black legend of the Holy Alliance was forged as early as the 1820s by authors like Pierre-Édouard Bignon in his book, Du Congrès de Trois Pots, which was immediately translated in Italian and Swedish. He was in fact more praising of the Holy Alliance than the other treaties signed in the years 1814-1818. Bignon also acknowledged the liberal aspect of the original plan attached to the Holy Alliance, which has been wonderfully reasserted in the works of historian Stella Gervas. Nevertheless, he was vigorously opposed to any intervention in Italy and supported the right for governments to change their constitution through a revolution. Later, on his books, Les Cabinets et les Peuples, translated as well in various European languages, Bignon wrote, I quote, that the Holy Alliance is a league of absolute power, and more than that, an alliance of oligarchy against the right of nations. Ghent was reading, I quote again, the repulsive work by Bignon in the beginning of the Congress of Ljubljana and reported to Pilate. Although Ghent never directly replied to Bignon's work, yet he defended the Congress system against the attack of other liberals like de Pradt in various articles, as well as in his letter and dispatches. He wrote in one of his articles in 1823, just after the Congress of Verona, that de Pradt even managed to write, I quote, the history of a Congress before the Congress actually took place. The same year, he praised Chateaubriand for using the expression l'Alliance continentale, the Continental Alliance, and furthermore explained that the Great Alliance was not yet fully dead in 1821, 1823, despite the clear opposition of Great Britain. The main cause of divergence, we already heard, was the so-called right of military intervention. At the Congress of Opava, Ljubljana, and Verona, Ghent had forged a right of military intervention from the great powers. In his previous essays, Gens already acknowledged that right of intervention, building upon the works of Christian Wolff, Civitas Maxima, and as well as Edmund Burke, who also acknowledged that right in his letters on a regicide peace. In his main two books written in 1801 and 1806, Gens elucidates that a nation could intervene in internal affair of another one if the security of all neighbor state was compromised and if a neighbor state was having an absolute and durable upheaval. This possibility of intervention was permitted for the interests of the community of state. The right of intervention was linked to the theorization of the international state system, which in his mind could always be improved, as he wrote in his essay on perpetual peace from 1800. According to Gens' conception, the right of armed intervention should be permitted as a norm in some cases, but in practice, one should decide it on the basis of what he called prudence or experience. After the Congress of Aix-la-Chapelle, Gens believed that the Congress system represented a new order of things, and that the constitution of the European Community was now based on the treaties of 1815 and 1818. As he recalled to the Prince of Wallachia, the great powers had managed to establish a principle of general union, uniting all states collectively with a federal bond under the guidance of the five principal powers, and so on. I'll leave you with the rest of the quotation. In the mind of Gens, as well as Metternich, Cassaroux, and many of other statesmen of the time, this system could not be confused with the Holy Alliance. As the Enlightenment rationalist, Gens could not accept any influence of religion on politics. Yet, at the congresses of Opava, Ljubljana, and Verona, Gens favored the right of interventions, since for him it was an extension of the prerogative of the great powers. That is why he could advocate it despite Britain's reluctance. Many fellow politicians were agree with those views. Like, for example, Graf von Münster, who was the head of the German Chancellery in London. He wrote to Gens the 2nd of January 1821, I quote, "Das allgemeine Völkerrecht gibt auch unstreitig jedem unabhängigen Staat das Recht, sich in die inneren Angelegenheit anderer Staaten zu mischen, die seiner eigenen Sicherheit gefährlich sein müssen. By contrast, many international lawyers from the 1830s wrote essays against that doctrine of disputative right of intervention, like the Portuguese Pinheiro Ferreira or the Italian Pellegrino Rossi. They both influenced after the Italian School of International Law from the 1850s and 1860s, also hardly opposed to any right of intervention, all that leading to a debate which culminates in the 1870s within the Institut de Droit International. In fact, this scientific debate on the matter is far from being closed, and the debate was continuing during the whole 19th century, and we could also argue that it still continues until today. Let me now come to my last and final points against cosmopolitan conservative networks. As you all know, he was in charge of the diplomatic correspondence with the princes of Wallachia and Moldova, and closely connected with many other diplomats, politicians, and writers from the region. It is important to stress the fact that many members of his cosmopolitan networks were hardly as conservative as him. He had, for example, in his networks, members of the Rally family who were friends to the progressive Russian poet Pushkin. Another example will be George Asaki, a Moldovan writer and poet who published the first periodical journal in Romanian in Romanian language in Moldova. Gens was also very close to someone that you, of course, all know in Slovenia, Janez Bartol Kopitar. And he actually helped this linguist to acquire a copy of the Slavonic Codice from Mount Athos in 1826 and 1827. So I will say that contrary to what has been often falsely claimed, also most recently, Gens was certainly not, I quote, one of the hardest critics of Greek independence and an opponent of the nationalism of the Balkan people. Even though it is true that that Gens was at first quite critical of the Greek War of Independence in accordance with the official Austrian position, later on, however, he began to advocate Greek independence, favoring a republic mode of government, harshly mocking in his correspondence the search for German monarch for Greece after the death of Capodistria. Additionally, he had also huge networks among the Greek, not only among migrants in Vienna, but also among members of the Philiki Etaria. The revolution of Greece, of course, and in the two Danubian principalities was not only a turning point for the Congress of Ljubljana, but also for Gens' personal political influence and finances. As he later reported to his ex-lover and the mother of his son, Katerina Svoboda, he, I quote, lost 2/3 of his income with the revolution in the Danube. He learned about the upheaval the 19th of March and talked about it deeply with Capodistria in Ljubljana the 28th of March. On 12th May, Gens had a long discussion with Capodistria about the upheaval, about the Greek insurrection. During the Congress, he also met several times with the Bishop of Ljubljana, August Johann Joseph Gruber, as well as other member of the, as well as the governor of the city, Joseph Graf von Swerve-Sporck. He met also with Professor Franz Richter, who was teaching a course on universal history at the Lyceum of Ljubljana, as well as with other intellectuals living in the city. But his main contact at the end of the Congress was Achille de Jouffroy, a French journalist and engineer. And actually, Gens convinced him to stay in Ljubljana instead of going to Italy. And Jouffroy confessed him that, I quote again, je vois bien qu'un jour à Laibach m'est plus utile que tout ce voyage d'Italie. To conclude very briefly, to summarize the above, Gens played a pivotal role at the Congress of Ljubljana for 3 reasons. First, as Metternich's right-hand man. Second, as author of many of the Congress diplomatic documents. Third, as one of the main architects of the European Concert of Powers. Gens was not an aristocrat and never became one, even if he did put a particle before his name. Above all, he was one of the most important so-called second-tier officials who shaped the new diplomatic system that emerged after the fall of the French emperor. Further research on the Congress of Ljubljana and on the European Concert of Powers should likewise put greater emphasis on similar actors such as Wacken or Depont for the Austrian, or Bois-Lecomte and Schwebel for the French delegation, as well as figures like the booksellers and diplomat Friedrich Scholl, who was also at the Congress of Ljubljana. In a similar vein, the role of diplomats and advisors of the countries of the so-called second rank remain understudied, as well as those by women, saloniers, and intellectuals, all of whom contribute to the distinct diplomatic culture of the concert era. Lastly, one should not forget the legal advisors, who were already being duly consulted during negotiation and who were responsible to substantiate the legal basis of official documents. In France, for example, the Comte Autrive acted as de facto legal advisor to the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, constantly being consulted by the official plenipotentiaries Blacas, Caraman, and La Ferronnays. Hvala lijepa for your attention.